Well, when you'd pick up the phone and you'd be told, get rid of those black pupils or we'll bomb your school tonight, you know?
Was there tension? Huge. Was there fear? Huge.
Well, I gave my very life for it, for the abolishment of this.
I never knew I was a white person until I came here.
So I told him in the confessions, I said, you know, I'm very angry. And I'm angry with this, and I'm angry with God.
The original mission for the church people who came out, say, to Africa, they would have been to minister to the British armies and administration personnel in Africa. They'd never heard of these, black people, pagans. They would have come out, the missionaries, to build up, and they would have seen this as their mandate: extend the Anglican Church, extend the Catholic Church, extend the Methodist Church. I think it was only later on somebody said, do you know, there's a lot of African people around here. Shouldn't we be relating to them in some way? If we think we're holding the truth of the eternal truth, we should share it with these savages.
If you look at the history of the Irish in Southern Africa, you could divide them into three sort of main groups. The normal settlers that you had, say, in Australia or in North America or wherever. And then you've got the British Army, which had a large number of Catholics in it. By the 1840s, at least 40 to nearly 50% of the British Army was Catholic, which meant a large portion of those were Irish. And then you had the missionaries.
Around the world, you could say, there would be a unified, common mandate, training, preparing, formation, we called it actually, forming someone to become a priest or a sister or a brother, religious. You are at the service of people. You try to provide what is necessary for them to practice their faith. And also, the church has always been involved in humanitarian, if that's the word, providing hospitals, schools, because governments never do that sufficiently.
The work that the Irish missionaries did was extraordinary. And of course, it came to a stage where the Irish missionaries were the last line of defense. You know, you can talk about your hospitals, you can talk about your schools, you can talk about social welfare and upliftment, all of which is true. And remember, we're talking about men and women, because the nuns come out too.
My name is Dr. Ciarán Riley from Maynooth University in the Republic of Ireland. I've been here for the past few days trying to understand and to research the Irish missionary experience in South Africa as part of a project which the Embassy of Ireland in South Africa have been undertaking for the past few months. And that is to record the voices and the experiences of the Irish missionary community who've been in South Africa, and also to chart the history of that missionary experience over the past 200 years.
We're here in Maitland Cemetery, just outside Cape Town. We're looking for the grave of Bishop John Rooney. He was the 4th Catholic Bishop of South Africa from 1886 to 1924. Bishop Rooney is known as the Builder. He established at least 8 or 9 churches, 2 or 3 schools during his period here in South Africa.
Thank you. John Rooney, right? Yeah. So he passed away at the age of 84. The street was the monastery.
Amongst the graves you see Irish names, Cuthbert, Fenton and so on. So it's not just the missionary community that are buried here. It's hundreds and hundreds of Irish graves. I think it's in this spot here. Oh, really? Here we go. At the foot of the church. We were both born in the same town in Edenderry, and here he lies at the foot of Table Mountain in the distance. And yeah, we've passed the graves of so many religious orders from Ireland, and Bishop Rooney was responsible for bringing many of those religious congregations to South Africa.
The Dominicans came out here in 1863, and they were in the City Bowl and underneath Table Mountain, so it was very, very hot. And in those days they wore full habits. They had serge, woolen serge garments on, and I think it must have been terribly difficult for them. And so they looked around for a place in the countryside to buy a boarding school, because there was a great need of that in those days. And this is what they eventually found.
It's quite difficult at times to actually estimate the number of missionaries that were here in South Africa. We talk about figures of between 3,000 and 5,000. So if we look at the cemetery here in Springfield, we have 100 plus graves of the sisters are buried there, 3 to a plot. So the number of missionaries here, buried here alone, would be close to 300-400 over that 150-year period. So I think we're beginning to get the sense that the figure of people actually in the field here working in South Africa over the past 200 years might have been far larger than we actually came to believe.
I actually think I had my 21st birthday a month or 2 after I arrived in South Africa. I was at school with the Dominicans, and I felt that they would lead me to God. They did it in an intelligent way that challenged you. It wasn't laying down the law and preventing you from questioning or challenging. They encouraged you to challenge and to open and to find answers and go looking for things.
The apartheid came in as 48, I think, in that election. But it wasn't as stringent, I think, as it became after 1960. I was appalled by the apartheid system, and that you had to be here if you were white and you had to be there if you were something else, and so on.
In those days, our schools were all white. And I think that was what kind of sowed the seed in me of being determined to work against it.
They had to work very quietly behind the scenes because, the police didn't want any mixing of races or anything like that. So it was a huge and courageous decision. And they said, we're opening the school to children of all races.
We were the very first, the Dominicans in Cape Town, Springfield, Campbell. We paved the way and saw the light and said, it's time, it's past the time. We started with the Catholic schools, and because it's a worldwide, the news would spread very quickly everywhere if anything had happened.
Well, I didn't know whether I was going to end up in prison that night or not, but I felt delighted because I really believed in it, and the parents were supportive, and the children. A few took their children out, but not many.
I think everybody was relieved because somebody had to open the door and just start. And we went in just like walking into the dark. We didn't know what was going to happen.
You could feel there was some danger. You had to, and also you had to be careful because it was all right if they bombed me, but you couldn't allow them to hurt other children.
Big headline in the Herald one morning, "We'll close them all," but they didn't.
We were among the beginners of being politically active, and I think people would have been surprised, but we did know that we had the support of our major leaders in Ireland and in Cape Town. But they liked us to be as discreet as possible.
He's the founder of the Salesian Centurion.
Yeah.
Then John Bosco. John Bosco said, have faith in her and you'll see what miracles are, and it's quite true. We do have great devotion to Mary under that title. That's why she's up there as well. It's the same way, Mary Helpers. All dictated by Don Bosco, the way he saw her in a dream.
All right.
I was born in a little village called Craigduff, Craighru, Spiddle, County Galway. And there, of course, I wouldn't be Father Patrick, I'd be Pádraig O'Nyachtan, my mother would call me. So then I switched to Father Pat, just to make it a bit easier. When I came here in the 60s, there was a sense of growth and missionary work, going out. I loved it. I was then in a boarding school. I had 200 boarders, and then I came to this house and I was 6 years here. And that was a very different experience for me, because here we had black, colored and white student as private student. And it was breaking my heart. They didn't realize it, but I wasn't allowed to take them on the same bus. They had to go on a black bus and a white bus. They weren't allowed to go swimming down the swimming pool down in Sea Point because it was a white swimming pool. They weren't allowed to go. It was horrible. It was horrible.
Towards the end of 1971, I was sent to Guguletu. It was built to house black people who had been living around Cape Town, who were forced out of the houses where they were staying, so that the apartheid policy could take effect. Black people together, separately, in inferior everything. White people together only in all the best, nicest places. The apartheid government gave names which meant the opposite. Guguletu means our pearl, our pride. Now, if you called a dump, you wouldn't call a dump our pride.
In the school in Lansdowne, 76, 77, there were riots going on, and they were marching up and down Lansdowne Road. And obviously the parents were extremely nervous. We just kept going. Was there tension? Huge. Was there fear? Huge.
You know, there was a lot of extra stuff happening. Young people in hiding, police chasing them, young people in hospitals, beaten up by police, tortured in police detention, and some of the young people gone into exile.
Our school was on the edge of Soweto in Deep Kloof, which was on the edge of Soweto. And there was a lot of unrest because the Transvaal government, Transvaal at that time, was trying to force through that the children should learn through the medium of Afrikaans. Now the children, they didn't know English. They were coming from Zulu, Sesotho, different. We were a non-government school, so we didn't follow that policy. But in the other schools, it was being followed, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. The children started protesting. And on June 16th, 1976, there was one big march planned. We knew there was unrest, but it didn't affect us until about 1 o'clock in the day. And the parents came to say, to take their children home to tell us, get out. There's the army are in, the security forces, there's killing going on. We couldn't go back for a week because there was the army tactics. They were using live bullets, and the people were burning beer halls because they were a source of revenue for the government, and their fathers were going to these beer halls. So for a whole week we couldn't go back. So that was the beginning of a period of great uncertainty and difficulty, right up until, I would say, 1994.
People didn't accept this awful system, which I would always believe was akin to slavery, treating people as slaves in their own land. They would organize to resist, boycott, etc. And when they would resist, then they would always be beaten down, and no resistance was tolerated. Police were shooting people in protests, in marches, young people especially, in Gugulet and around the country. So we had a very strong ministers fraternal, all the church ministers together, very supportive. And we used to support each other going to those highly charged funerals.
Firstly, we want to join in solidarity with the churches in South Africa, with Irish missionaries in South Africa, and of course, above all, we want to join in solidarity with the oppressed people of South Africa, who are the victims of this terribly evil system.
Go. When I came back in the 80s, it was the state of emergency and all that. So once I crossed the border, you felt something closing in on you. The apartheid situation.
I remember that people were not even allowed to speak in public, but they would use the occasion of funerals, you see, to do that. I don't think I'd ever experienced so much anger. You could sense the anger in the church and at the cemetery and on the way to the cemetery, the anger of people. And the police vans driving right next to us, and the people with their fists shouting, you know, in singing their songs. The Amabulu Azizinja, the Boers are dogs, and they will die as dogs. And you could see there, you see, they lost their fear of the oppressors. They just say it openly.
There were squatters in Rondebosch, and because it was a posh area, there was huge pressure on them to get rid of them. As soon as we took them in, the authorities' attitude changed completely, and they took every woman and child on the property. That was one of the incidents that affected me quite a lot, because in those trucks, and there were two of them, packed with people, the mourning and the singing went right through your heart. And you were just, it was the middle of the night, you could do nothing. You could do absolutely nothing. And where they took them, we never found out.
I always had this feeling coming and going was, you're coming to the end of the world now. It stops here at John Smuts. And be careful going through the customs, because you're going to be glared at. They're saying to you with their eyes or with their faces, what are you doing here? Who are you? Are you a foreigner? Are you coming to tell us? Are you coming to tell us what we should do about apartheid?
When I arrived here first, it was in November '76. My parish priest, he said to me, what I want you to do is to take charge of the area known as the hostels and a place called Zone 14. This is the Zone 14 area. Now the hostels consisted of 5 hostels. At that time, only men. It was regarded as one of the biggest hostels in all of South Africa. You had 5 hostels. In each hostel, you had 8 blocks. In each block, you had 32 rooms. In each room, you had 16 men. It was very difficult because it was a very rough place. The hostels, when you think of so many men together, there was a lot of violence, there was an awful lot of drinking.
Yes, we are here at Zone 14, Sebokeng, next to the Emmanuel Catholic Church. This is my church. Being black people, we were made not to feel proud of being people. But when we enter into the church with a white priest and a missionary, this Irish priest, they made us proud to feel that we are full human beings.
African culture was suppressed. Blacks became invisible. Black culture was suppressed or ignored. Black sport of every type was completely ignored.
We were so fortunate to have this kind of priest who were defying the apartheid government by working in the black communities, and ended up sleeping in the black community. They eat what the black communities were eating. They learned the culture of the black people. They even adopted the suffering, the struggle that we are facing.
Can I tell you a story about one of the guys who used to help me in the hostel? His name was Gift Makume. In April 1993, one of the leaders of the African National Congress, a guy called Chris Hani, who was also Catholic, was gunned down in a place called Boksburg, which is not too far from here. I, together with some of the people from here, went to his night vigil. While we were there, a group in a blue Volkswagen passed through Sebokeng, the different zones. This man was living in zone 12. The group in the Volkswagen stopped outside his house. 2 men got out of the car. They went straight to the bedroom where the wife was there with the 2 children. She was at her breasts, shot dead the 2 kids, shot her. They killed 14 people that night. When we came back from Chris Hani's funeral, that's what we were met with. And I remember going to the house, and I remember sitting in that house, and I remember I could not say a prayer. I could not use a text of scripture. I could say nothing. I just sat with them for an hour. The kids outside in the streets were baying for blood. They wanted guns. They wanted to attack anybody associated with what they associated with the government.
Coming back from Ireland over the years, it wasn't the nicest experiences, because you were going into an abnormal society, and in a sense you were learning to behave abnormally, you know. Yet you had a journey to do. You were part of religion, you were part of God's band, and God's band didn't agree with apartheid, and so you had to develop ways of resisting, unique ways for every area, always in collaboration with the local people, not being sort of a hero or something like that, you know. People love heroes in television if they're one-man shows, but we didn't play the one-man show.
I called some of the youth leaders at the time. I had a great meeting with them here in this particular church, and I gave them a lecture on politics. I said, it's the art of persuasion. I said, you don't use violence to forward your political idea. Did it make any difference? They agreed totally with me, but their actions continued. And killing people, attacking them, by burning them alive, became a kind of an instrument for furthering political aims. It was terrible. And it seemed to me that people were saying the more violent you can become, or the more violent acts you carry out, the stronger you are politically.
There was all sorts of subterfuge. I had to compose sermons on Sunday to be understood by two different groups within the parish. You know, Teddy was the same. We had to talk in coded language.
The doors were open for the social movements to have meetings in the church. Even the victims of apartheid were using the church buildings.
The leaflets which were opposed to the presence of the soldiers all came from this church, from an office at the back of the church that was run by a trade union.
The weapons of the weak, the weapons of the poor. The poor seemed to be able to get weapons too. And even peace, non-violent weapons, which was the rent boycott. It started in this area too. And all the parishes, we participated. I suppose we didn't pay rent for a year or two until apartheid was over.
Being white, Irish priest, challenging the white government, they empowered us not to stand up against the injustices.
Benin Fahy, great man. Benin used to say to me that not many of us will die in our beds, because that was you didn't know when you went out in the morning if you were going to come home alive at night, you know.
This is the epicenter of where the final insurrection took place before the end of apartheid, and the places where the meetings took place to enable this to happen between about perhaps nearly 1 million people, 5 or 6 townships, were the churches. And of course, the administration hated the idea that they could not come in and burst the doors open and arrest everybody.
I was arrested several times by the security branch. I was tortured, choked for 11 hours, kicked. It was on the 11th of June, 1985. I was put in the cold water, 11 hours torturing. I was put on there. This is painful. Because it was bad. I'm trying to avoid talking about that, but when that happened to me, it affected my mother. She was not happy about that when she saw that happen. And she felt that I must stop criticizing the apartheid government, because she said to me, they are going to kill you. But when she saw the support of the church, the priest visiting, coming, she realized that my child is not a criminal, because he's got support of the church. He's got support of the priest.
No rush, take your time.
Right, it's around here where we're going. Right. Yeah. I was born in Dublin, in Temple Street Hospital. I was the first of 5 children, and I was reared in Tullamore. After a good summer holiday at home, I decided I'd join these friars. My name was changed from James to Hyacinth When we picked the names out of a bag, I couldn't even pronounce it when I saw it. And I remember writing home to my mother and saying, I've a real funny name, Hyacinth. And she wrote me back a lovely letter, said, oh God, she says, that's one of my favourite flowers. Well, I said, I'm no little flower. Anyway, in the very bad last years of apartheid in the 1980s, very many of the parishes in Pretoria were scared letting people talk out against apartheid, whereas in the seminary we permitted it. So that's why the seminary became a focal point, because of the nature of the Catholic Church in South Africa, 9.7% roughly. In other words, we were a minority church. And in fact, under the old apartheid regime, there was a thing called the Roomse Gevaar, meaning the Roman danger. And we were considered a danger to the country because of what we were teaching. And I had to teach social ethics, for example, but also bioethical issues in moral theology, plus, of course, the life issues like abortion, euthanasia.
When I decided to join the Holy Cross Sisters, I was only 17 years of age, and so I came out here in September 1947. Oudtshoorn was at that time, probably still is, but very, very Dutch reformed and very, very prejudiced against Catholics. But when I look back on those years, I can see how our presence there broke down the prejudice slowly, slowly, slowly.
I did experience a little bit of the oppression being a Catholic in Northern Ireland and being a religious as well. I mean, I remember when we went to Queen's, we went in our full habit to Queen's, and we used to have to cross Sandy Row. And the boys from Sandy Row used to come with their hobnail boots, and they used to walk behind us and they would say, the pick of a penguin, the pick of a penguin. We were petrified. Our main thrust when we came to South Africa was education, working to empower black people, to enable them to actually begin to take responsibility for their own issues and to stand up. And that was something that was not acceptable in South Africa at the time. It was such a level of put down and such a strong level of fear in everybody.
I remember one of the things really that happened that even today when I think of it, it tears something out of my heart. But the boys in the school, and they said they were building a park. Now, if you know the township, there's no room for anything. The houses are right next to each other. They used to call them matchbox houses. Everybody the same, because nobody could own a house, though all of them were exactly the same, and row by row by row. So they said they're building a park. So I thought, well, where are they building a park? And it was, say about those 3 chairs, but that's a small, small place. But many of their mothers worked as domestic workers in white homes, and their employers would say, no, take a slip of this or take a slip and plant it. And these boys would come out and they would plant this. They were so proud of this park. We were out early one morning, and the long faces, the army had put their Caspers right over it until everything was crushed. And those boys, they were big, they were 18 or 19 or 20, I don't know what age they were, but they were school leaving here, and then they often start at school later. Big tears in their eyes, and I thought the injustice of that. So I told him, I said in the confessions, I said, I'm very angry. But I'm saying it nice and calmly now, but I wasn't calm then. I'm angry. And he says, what are you angry with? I'm angry with the police, and I'm angry with the army, and I'm angry with, I had a whole big crescendo, and I was worked up to the hilt, and the injustice in this country, and I'm angry with this, and I'm angry with God that allows it all to happen. But, it was spoken with venom and with... myself after all this time. You know, it just shows you the strength of the emotions that were there. Oh yes, I could have taken up arms. That's what I was afraid of. I didn't say it, but that's what I was afraid of. I could have taken up arms. The ANC were around recruiting people, and I was getting so angry. I could have, but I didn't. I think they moved me because I was just about to get to that stage. Anyway, that thing's off, isn't it?
It's not actually, but it's...
Well, you can say it as the truth.
Yeah, you did.
It's the truth.
When the students became very active in the 60s after Soweto, they would come looking for help, and at one stage actually they came asking me for, I don't know what you'd call it, chemicals and stuff, you know, from laboratories, that I would have access to that. And I said, guys, you know.
I remember one Sunday reading out one at the 7:30 Mass, condemning apartheid and things like that. And on the 9 o'clock Mass, I was hearing confessions, and suddenly the organist burst into the confessional and she says, Father, I just got a phone call. They're coming to kill you.
Some people did, even though they were Afrikaners, did respect what the church was offering. But then others, no, they equated it with communism. Helder Câmara, who was Bishop of Recife in Brazil, said, when I feed the hungry, I'm a saint. When I ask, why are they hungry, I'm a communist. And you see, we ask the questions. You don't ask those questions.
I came with an attitude of, you know, you don't tell me what to do. I will make up my own mind and I will do. You know, so I think that's what got me into a lot of trouble with the security police as well.
I used to do some kind of correspondence with Radio na Gaeltacht, and I was told that we were all recorded, and that if we used word like apartheid, or if we used the Prime Minister's name, things like that, they would then find a translation. So I told them I won't be using those words, but I was giving full account of what was happening here.
Even when I was driving, they would drive on my tail. And because many people during that time, they were actually run off the road and they would overturn and get killed, like a number of prominent people.
The security system of the Afrikaans authorities couldn't understand why religious people were they would call it interfering in politics. It boggled their Calvinist minds to that the mainline churches were coming together, assisting activists, having meetings with them, allowing them to use their churches, use the rooms.
Please move now.
You had those priests who were actually involved in the movement, you know, hiding people, you know, smuggling things, taking messages, all that goes along with an insurgency movement, okay? You then had those who supported the black population. The Donald Lamont sort of is the big figure up in Zim, but down here you had figures also. And then you had those who just quietly went about their own work, looking after the black communities and black society, and building up a cadre of young people who would become the new middle class in the new dispensation.
And the release of Nelson, oh yes, oh my goodness. Well, I'll tell you about the release of Nelson Mandela. Everybody sat, we watched, and walking out of that prison. Oh, it was an amazing time. And then he stood and said, you know, that speech from Cape Town, everything about that right enough, it brought such hope, yeah, in the midst of darkness.
Never, never, and never again shall it be
that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
Madiba was going to be the saviour of the people. So it was electric that day in Cape Town on the parade. Wow, I mean the parade was just packed. The whole place was electric, with a sense of hope and I think a sense that something new was about to happen, you know.
Election day, and I was in the rural areas then up in the Mozambique border. Oh, it was such a wonderful morning. And you see, there was no transport there because there was no roads or anything. So what they did to get the old people there, they pushed them in wheelbarrows.
It was one of the most peaceful days in the history of South Africa. And you saw the pictures of lines and snake lines of hundreds of people waiting patiently to vote. It was unforgettable, yeah.
I felt myself, I was like a school child. I couldn't stop giggling. You know, that was my experience. And I know it was an expression of a whole lot of emotion. But somehow, those days, those 3 days, they were all kind of coming, lights were flashing kind of, times when I was frightened, the times I was hoping I would come home tonight. The times that, you know, I can't say the times because it was a continuous thing that I won't, you know, that justice will be dealt out to all of us.
So we're headed down to the tree where Sister Ethel started. Today marks exactly 32 years since she began the centre. And when she started, she didn't have anything that we have now. She was one lady with a rucksack on her back and just this dream to do something for the poor. Her heart has really always been with the poor. And so, yeah, she went around house to house, introducing herself, assessing the needs. And then one day she met a lady called Diane, and Diane had a tree growing outside of her home. And Diane said, you know, why don't you work from under here and people can come to you? And that's what she did. Under the tree, she did a lot of wound dressings and a lot of basic nursing. But she also used to teach the kids elementary mathematics, ABCs, play with them, skip rope with them. And yeah, that's how the centre really started.
Well, it all began under the tree. I have to thank that tree for so much. And I feel one day it's going to talk. You know, it knows so many stories. It has heard so much. It has wiped so many tears and it has rang out with laughter. Definitely in Port Elizabeth, I do see the poverty. It just rises up all around you. The place is dry, the place is barren. The people are hungry looking, they're poor. Who wouldn't be touched by this terrible poverty? These people are South African people. The answer is within them. I'm not coming from Ireland with the answer, you know. So everything that has been here, the people have requested it.
One of the first things that they asked Sister Ethel for was a church. And so they had a little collection. She had a matchbox and she asked them to put whatever they had in it to start the funds. And collectively they had 11 cents that day. And with 11 cents they started the fundraising for the church that we have here today.
There would be days out in Makanani when I was thirsty and when I was hungry. And I would say tired because I would have left East just at 4:30 in the morning. And why should there be this place? People are way out here where there was no medical services for them. There wasn't a school in sight. The kids would have to walk and walk, and they had to do that because they were black children. Of course, I was angry and I was low.
The church tower has a glass cross in it, and that was all pieces of broken glass that Sister Ethel had the people collect, and that was melted down. And there's a plaque on the side of the church that says your life may be as broken as a piece of glass, but that same piece of glass still allows light to shine through it. And so it's her message of encouragement to the people to keep going no matter what.
I was arrested a few times, and, you know, the police drove me into right into the bush and let me off about 2 o'clock in the morning. And they treated me very roughly. There would be mornings when I would close the door of the convent and say, I hope I will return. So I lived with that kind of dread. The church to me in Ireland wasn't just a building. It was the whole expression and the community together. You couldn't contain us within a building. We were church as we walked around.
I came to the center. We receive things that help our children because we've got children that they don't have food at home. So I come here to pick up some things for the children.
We are the Two Sabbaths Sewing for Africa, which is a project that was started by Sister Marion and I in 2012. Since then, we started training people how to sew. Reason being, we saw a lot of people unemployed, and the church couldn't really afford to support everybody. So we decided that if people can be able to support themselves, start their own businesses or get jobs, that would come handy for them.
When I mix with people, you know, like say for instance here, we were all like one. We were working together. It was very, very enriching. So I feel that it has broadened my outlook, and that South Africa now is my country, and they're my people. You know, they're my people.
She molded me to what I am today, because I came here knowing nothing. I didn't know anything, how to thread a machine, how to teach a person, how to talk in front of people.
Before he was given up to death, a death he freely accepted, he took bread and gave you thanks. He broke the bread, gave it to his friends and said, "Take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you."
I think one of the things that you have to recognise about the missionaries and all of the people who came to South Africa over the last kind of 2-3 centuries, but they were all part of that larger colonial project. And then I suppose this film focuses in on the experience of those individual people. How did they respond to what they saw? And particularly in the latter period during the apartheid regime, these people who are still alive today, how did they experience that system? How did they deal with that system? And how did they make a difference? There's of course a larger story to be told about Irish people in South Africa, and there are many dimensions to that. And some of those dimensions may not be good, because we know that the role of the church also is quite problematic. You only have to look at the stories coming out of Ireland around child abuse to know that. But there are also really good and positive stories, and I think this project has been worth doing because it tells a story that was hitherto unknown, and it particularly gives a voice to women within the church that might otherwise not have an opportunity to speak about what they did and what they experienced and why they did it.
We always actually stand on the shoulders of the people who have gone before us, really. They've done a lot of the groundwork. I mean, there have been missionaries in this country. I mean, our own sisters are missionaries here since 1883. I mean, I only came in 1980, like 100 years later. So, I mean, the work that has been going on for 100 years is certainly something that I value.
We, in our hopefully wisdom, decided prayerfully what was the best way forward. There was no interference by the church, but the church watched us. And we were totally, as far as I remember, we were totally supported.
The Vatican issues statements which would condemn racism, which would condemn depriving the poor, you know, or the rights of the poor, and their, you know. So you could use the Catholic Church.
So they were linked to Rome, but not to the extent of control. The links were administrative controls. They weren't political links. They did what they wanted.
I can remember one of the bishops saying to me, he said, yes, he said, you sound like a sweet, nice little nun, he said, and I can see you twisting those bishops all around your little finger.
And we have gone places I don't think that any man could enter. I think we're blessed with great intuition, great courage, single-mindedness. We're not here to prove ourselves. Not that I'm saying the men are or anything like that. I don't know what I would do without men in my life. They've been so supportive.
Of course the church didn't, and the church can't live up to its mandate, because the church is made up of people like me and you. So the church is very fallible, weak, sinful, all of the human condition business. But we also believe church is full of the Spirit of God. So it's that eternal conflict.
I doubt if there was an Irish child my age that wasn't in some way influenced by the story of Irish missionaries, because in a sense there were stories from very far away, from a place that we didn't have much information about, and actually they were a primary source of information about what was going on in Africa. For South Africa, I suppose in the 80s more particularly, that was the time when the anti-apartheid issue really broke into people's consciousness. And of course, the church and church organisations were very prominent in condemning apartheid, maybe at a time when it wasn't so much part of the political conversation in Ireland. And of course, the missionaries were a huge part of bringing the stories back home of what apartheid actually looked like when you were working in the townships and rural areas.
It's the end of an era. You look around at all the Irish missionaries now and you see we are all about the same age. And there's a certain sadness with it, you know, and the memories. I wouldn't say nostalgia, but a certain realization that the future is in the hands of other people.
Their impact is a historical impact, I'm afraid. I don't know now, apart from sort of a rosy, reflection and love of Ireland, that the direct impact, because of the shrinking numbers, is as great as it was.
It seems to be the way the Lord is working now. The church is established, and He's calling people from within the country itself.
A part of our legacy is we have left a very viable congregation of African women who belong to an international congregation and are exposed to that experience of internationality.
Culture has completely changed. So whenever you actually come up with the idea to say, I want to become a sister, everyone around you is like looking at you to say, you must be crazy. So it was like a thing of losing your friends and being separated from everything that you actually believed in, because you're trying to respond to something that is spiritual.
It's not an easy life, and so anything that's not easy doesn't naturally attract. And I like that poem of Robert Frost when he says, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that made all the difference.
And so after 200 years, the involvement of the Irish may be at an end, but I think the memories of what they've done, and you can hear it in the words of those that have benefited from the missionaries, that the Irish will be long remembered here in South Africa.
We were able to be missionaries in a very unique way and be part of the South African story for the last final years of apartheid and the beginnings of what people talk about as the new dawn, the new South Africa.
I think our role at the time was to walk with people during those very difficult times. I think that's what we did. We walked with them. We shared with them. We spent an awful lot of time at funerals. We spent an awful lot of time in prison. We spent an awful lot of time in hospitals. That's what we were doing.
My father was in the Labour Party in Ireland, so maybe I grew up with a little sense of, you know, that if you get involved in politics, you do it to try and help people who are poorer or who are, you know, more deprived. And obviously, the most important thing to be deprived of is your freedom.
Home and family will always be spittle. And we're very, very close. My brothers and sisters, family, and so on. However, I think I'll probably stay here till I'm cremated.
When I would see, you know, an old sister or a priest or somebody, you know, but whom I knew was expressed a great ministry, and now is feeble and maybe needs a walking stick or something like this. And I always look on Ireland as a mother, and I would say, you know, Ireland, Mother Ireland, this is one of your great daughters. And when they die, I always had that in my heart. This is one of the great daughters of Ireland who has given her life to the people of South Africa, dedicated it to Christ and expressed it in love for the people. I have travelled far, far from my own native home, far away o'er the mountains, far away o'er the foam. I have seen many sights, many places I have seen, but there's none to compare with the cliffs of Dunedin. I could put Lissy Casey into that.
Uyinkwezi khanye bumnyameni ubumnyama obungaka ingathi uwedwa uyinkwezi khanye bumnyameni ubumnyama obungaka ingathi uwedwa uyinkwezi khanye bumnyameni ubumnyama obungaka ingathi uwedwa khanye bumnyameni ubumnyama bungaka ingathi uwedwa uyinkwezi khanye bumnyameni ubumnyama bungaka ingathi uwedwa uyinkwezi khanye bumnyame ingathi uwedwa uyinkwenkwezi khanye bumnyameni ubumnyama bungaka ingathi